My parents disowned me in court, but my secret made them regret everything. I grew up in a family where success meant everything. My parents praised my older brother for every small achievement, while I was the disappointment. When I dropped out of college to start my own business, they laughed. "You'll never make it," my father said. My mother shook her head, muttering, "Such a failure." I stopped trying to convince them. Deep down, I knew I had to prove myself not to them, but to me. Years passed, and while my family flaunted my brother's stable corporate career, I worked quietly, day and night, building something from scratch. It wasn't glamorous. It was long nights of ramen noodles, sleeping in my office, and hearing no more times than I could count. My family never asked how I was doing. To them, I had already failed. Then one day, my brother announced his engagement. My parents beamed with pride, planning a grand celebration. I received a half-hearted invitation, more out of obligation than love. "Don't embarrass us," my mother warned, adjusting her pearls. I bit my tongue, deciding I'd show up, smile, and quietly disappear again into my own world. The engagement party was held in a lavish hall, filled with people dressed in designer clothes. I walked in wearing a simple suit I'd bought years ago. Nobody noticed me, nobody ever did. Until she did. "Mi broteras fiancé con clarast I'd ever seen." She looked at me curiously, as though she already knew something my family didn't. "Ah, this is my little brother," my brother said dismissively when introducing me. He never really figured things out. Laughter rippled through the circle of guests. I forced a polite smile, but before I could excuse myself, Clara tilted her head, studying me closely. "Wait," she said slowly. "What's your last name again?" I repeated it, confused. Her eyes widened. "You're the founder." The room went silent. My parents froze. My brother frowned. "Founder? Founder of what?" Clara turned to him, disbelief in her voice. "The tech company I've been following for years, the one making headlines everywhere. The one that just closed a multi-million-dollar deal. He's the one who built it." Gasps spread across the room. Guests exchanged stunned glances, whispering. My father's face drained of colour. My mother's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. My brother's jaw tightened, his pride unravelling in front of everyone. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small, I felt seen. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Clara smiled warmly at me, her voice gentle. "I've admired your company for so long. It's changing lives. You should be proud." My throat tightened. No one in my family had ever spoken those words to me. My brother's fiancée, someone I had just met, saw me more clearly than my own parents ever did. My father finally stammered, "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him, the man who once said I'd never amount to anything. "Because you never wanted to listen," I said calmly. "You were too busy being ashamed of me." His lips trembled, but no words came out. For once, I had the power and I didn't even need to raise my voice. The rest of the evening was awkward. My parents tried to salvage their image, suddenly introducing me with forced pride. My brother avoided me, his jealousy barely hidden. But Clara, she kept stealing glances my way, her eyes filled with quiet respect. That night, I realized something powerful. Sometimes family won't believe in you, but strangers will. And sometimes that's all you need. After that night, everything changed, but not in the way my family expected. Instead of congratulating me, my brother's smile turned colder. He had always lived in the spotlight, the golden child, while I was the shadow. But now, his fiancée had looked at me with admiration, and that shattered his pride. Jealousy began to fester, and I could see it in the way his jaw clenched every time my name was mentioned. My parents, desperate to save face, suddenly acted as though they had always supported me. We knew he was destined for greatness, my mother told guests. But I remembered the nights she called me worthless. Their praise wasn't love, it was convenience. They didn't see me. They saw the reflection of my success on their reputation. And for the first time, I didn't crave their approval. A week later, I received an unexpected call. It was Clara. "Can we meet?" she asked. My first thought was that my brother had sent her. But when we met at a quiet cafe, she leaned forward and whispered, "He's not handling this well. He feels threatened by you." Her eyes were full of worry. "I don't want to lose him, but he's changing." I sighed. "Clara, I never meant to overshadow him. I just wanted to build something of my own." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "He thinks you'll ruin everything for him. That people will compare." For the first time, I saw fear in her. She wasn't afraid of me, she was afraid of the darkness growing inside my brother. Days later, rumors began to circulate. Investors called me, uneasy. We heard things about fraud, about shady deals. I was stunned. My record was clean. But someone was planting lies, poisoning my reputation. It didn't take long to figure out who. My own brother. His jealousy had crossed a line. It wasn't just about family pride anymore. He wanted to destroy me. When I confronted him, his mask slipped. "You think you can embarrass me, steal my moment?" His voice shook with rage. "Clara was supposed to look at me that way. Not you. Never you." His words cut deep, not because of the hatred, but because it revealed how fragile his pride truly was. Clara walked in mid-argument, her face pale as she listened. "Is this true?" she asked him softly. My brother's silence was louder than any confession. She turned to me, her eyes filled with guilt and sorrow. "I'm so sorry. I thought he just needed time. I didn't know he'd go this far." I shook my head. "Clara, it's not your fault. You can't change someone who doesn't want to change." My brother's face twisted in fury. "Stay out of this. She's mine. She doesn't need your pity." But Clara didn't flinch. She looked at him with a heartbreak that told me something had shifted inside her. That night, I lay awake, wondering if family was supposed to mean unconditional support or if blood ties were just chains. My parents had failed me with their neglect. My brother had betrayed me with his jealousy. And yet, the person who had shown me the most kindness was a woman who wasn't even part of our family, at least not yet. The next day, Clara called again. Her voice was steady, but her words shocked me. "I ended the engagement," she said. "I can't marry a man who destroys the people closest to him." There was a long silence before she added softly, "But I need you to know. The way you carry yourself, the way you fought without stooping low, it changed to me. You're stronger than you realize." When word of the broken engagement spread, my parents exploded. "Do you realize what you've done?" My mother shrieked over the phone. "You humiliated this family." My father's voice followed, colder. "You've always been jealous of your brother. Now you've ruined his future." I listened in silence, realizing they didn't even consider the truth that my brother had caused his own downfall. To them, I was the villain. Meanwhile, the rumors about my company kept spreading. Investors pulled out. Contracts stalled. My team looked at me with fear in their eyes. I knew my brother wasn't finished. He was determined to see me crushed. He had connections, leverage, and the family name that still held power in certain circles. But he didn't have what I had: the truth and the resilience born from years of rejection. I decided to fight back, not with anger, but with evidence. My legal team traced the source of the lies. Every road led back to him. Anonymous tips from his email, shell accounts created under his name. I gathered everything. This wasn't just petty jealousy anymore, this was sabotage. and I had the proof to expose him. But when I finally confronted him again, it wasn't rage I felt, it was sadness. "Why, brother?" I asked. "You had everything, the family, their pride, their love. Why destroy me for wanting my own path?" He laughed bitterly. "Because for the first time in my life, you stood taller than me, and I couldn't bear it." His voice cracked, revealing a man broken by his own pride. I could have ruined him right then, taken the evidence public, destroyed his reputation the way he tried to destroy mine. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized something: his punishment wasn't mine to deliver. He had already destroyed himself. "I won't be like you," I whispered. "I won't waste my life hating." And I walked away, leaving him trembling in his own bitterness. Weeks later, my company stabilized. Investors returned once I showed them the truth. My business not only survived, it grew stronger. My team saw my strength in the storm, and their loyalty deepened. I built partnerships with people who valued integrity, not family names. And slowly, the rumors faded, replaced with respect. But at home, the fracture remained. My parents, unwilling to see their golden son as anything less than perfect, clung to their version of the story. "You divided this family," they insisted. I stopped arguing. Sometimes, no matter what evidence you bring, people will choose their illusions over the truth. And that was their burden to carry, not mine. Clara reached out again. She had moved on, starting fresh in her own life, away from the shadow of my brother's bitterness. "You taught me something," she told me. "That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from toxic love, even if it hurts." Her words echoed in my mind. Maybe we weren't meant to be anything more than two souls crossing paths at the right time, but her respect healed wounds my family never could. In the end, success wasn't about money or recognition. It wasn't even about proving my family wrong. It was about freedom, the freedom to live my truth without begging for acceptance from those who would never give it. I stopped chasing their approval and started valuing the people who saw me for who I truly was. Years later, when people spoke of me, they didn't mention the failures my family mocked. They spoke of the company I built, the lives I changed, and the strength I showed in the face of betrayal. And as for my brother, his name faded into whispers, remembered not for his success, but for the way envy consumed him. My story wasn't about revenge, it was about resilience. Time passed, and I found peace in places I never expected. I no longer checked my phone for my parents' approval or replayed their cruel words in my head. My company flourished, but more importantly, I flourished. For the first time, I felt whole. My family's betrayal had carved deep scars, but those scars became the map that guided me to strength I never knew I had. One day, I was invited to speak at a global business summit. Thousands of people from around the world gathered to hear stories of innovation and resilience. As I stood on that stage, looking out at the crowd, I thought of the boy I once was, the boy my parents mocked, the one my brother envied. And I realized I wasn't that boy anymore. I was a man who had built his own legacy. After my speech, people lined up to shake my hand, to thank me for inspiring them. Among the crowd, I noticed familiar faces: my parents. They stood awkwardly in the back, pride and shame clashing in their eyes. For the first time in years, they didn't look at me like a failure. They looked at me like someone they no longer knew how to approach. Later, they came to me. My mother's voice trembled. We're proud of you," my father added stiffly. "You've done well." But their words felt hollow. They weren't proud because of who I was, they were proud because of what I had achieved. And I realized I no longer needed their praise. I smiled politely, but inside I had already let go of their approval. My brother wasn't there. Rumors said he had moved away, chasing one failed venture after another, never finding peace. Clara had told me once that envy is a prison and he had locked himself inside with no key. I pitied him, but I couldn't save him. He had chosen that path, and sometimes letting people face their own demons is the only way they might ever learn. With time, I built not just a company, but a community. I mentored young entrepreneurs, especially those who came from families that didn't believe in them. I told them, your worth isn't defined by their vision of you, it's defined by your persistence. Watching their eyes light up reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. Not to prove my family wrong, but to prove myself right. Clara and I stayed in touch occasionally, as friends. She once told me, life has a way of putting us where we're meant to be, and she was right. Our paths diverged, but her kindness had been a lifeline when I was drowning in my family's scorn. I would always be grateful for her, not because she validated me, but because she reminded me I was worth more than I believed. One evening, I visited my childhood home for the first time in years. The walls seemed smaller, the rooms emptier. I stood in the place where I had once been mocked and belittled, and instead of pain, I felt release. This house no longer had power over me. My identity wasn't built here, it was built in the nights I fought for my dream when no one believed in me. Looking back, I realized my story wasn't about revenge against my family. It was about rising above the chains of their expectations. They wanted me to follow their script: school, career, approval. But I had written my own story, and though it was harder, it was mine. That ownership was worth more than any inheritance, any apology, any belated pride. So when people ask me today what drives me, I don't say money, or fame, or even recognition. I tell them the truth. I was once told I'd never make it, and I decided to prove not to them, but to myself that I could. Because in the end, the greatest victory isn't making your family proud. It's learning to stand tall, even when they never will. Years later, my name appeared on the cover of major magazines. Journalists called me a self-made visionary. But I knew the truth: my story wasn't about being self-made. It was about surviving betrayal and using the pain as fuel. Every headline reminded me of the nights I had doubted myself, and the voice of my mother whispering that I'd never amount to anything. Those whispers no longer haunted me, they drove for me. One afternoon, I received an unexpected letter. It was from my brother. His handwriting was shaky, uneven, like the words themselves resisted being written. "I'm sorry," it read. Not because I was caught, but because I let envy ruin me. You were never my enemy. I was my own. For a long time, I stared at that letter, unsure whether to forgive, but in my heart, I already had. Not for him, but for myself. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean inviting people back into your life. It means releasing their hold over you, and as I folded that letter, I felt lighter. My brother's choices were his own. My parents' blindness was theirs to carry. None of it defined me anymore. I had built my own foundation, one they couldn't shake, no matter how hard they tried. Eventually, I started sharing my story publicly, not just the polished success, but the raw truth. I told audiences about rejection, about nights spent questioning my worth, about family betrayal that nearly broke me, and people listened. Not because I was a millionaire, but because my story was their story too. They saw themselves in my pain and in my perseverance. Emails began pouring in from strangers across the world. A young woman wrote, "My parents tell me I'm wasting my time as an artist, but after hearing you, I believe in myself again." A man confessed, "I've lived in my brother's shadow for years. You gave me hope that I can step out." In helping others, I healed parts of myself I never knew were still hurting. My parents grew older, their voices softer. They called sometimes, less with criticism, more with longing. "We miss you. my mother said once, though her tone carried regret she never fully voiced. I visited a case duty out of choice. I gave them kindness, not because they had earned it, but because kindness is what made me free. At one family gathering, years after it all, I stood in the same living room where they had once called me a failure. My father, grey and frail, raised his glass. "To our son," he said quietly, "the one who taught us we were wrong." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was enough. Not for closure, for confirmation that I had grown beyond needing their approval. The real closure came later, when I stood before a group of young dreamers at a mentorship program I had founded. Looking at their faces, filled with the same fire I once carried, I realized my legacy wasn't money or recognition. It was this helping others rise from the ashes of doubt and betrayal, just as I had. My scars had become their roadmap. And so, when people ask about my family now, I don't tell them about the betrayal or the jealousy. I tell them about the lesson that family doesn't always build you sometimes, they break you. But in that breaking, you find the steel inside yourself. You learn that the truest family is the one you choose, those who believe in you when no one else does. My story began with humiliation, rejection, and envy. But it didn't end there. It ended with resilience, growth, and freedom. I am no longer the boy begging for my parents' love or competing for my brother's shadow. I am the man who built his own light. And if you remember one thing from my story, late itibus is sometimes the greatest gift betrayal gives you is the strength to never need their approval again. The more I spoke, the more I understood my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside by the very people they trusted most. Every scar I carried had turned into a lantern, shining the way for those still trapped in the darkness of doubt. And that, I realized, was the true power of survival. There came a moment when I was invited back to my old school, the place where teachers once shook their heads at me and classmates whispered that I'd never make it. I walked onto that stage, not as the broken boy they remembered, but as the founder they never expected. As I looked into those young eyes, I thought, if even one of them believes in themselves because of me, then everything was worth it. After my speech, a quiet student approached. He barely met my eyes as he said, "My dad tells me every day I'll never be good enough, but after hearing you, maybe I can be." My throat tightened. I placed a hand on his shoulder and told him the words I once needed to hear. You don't need his belief. You only need your own. Meanwhile, life for my brother continued down a different path. Occasionally, I heard whispers of his struggles, failed ventures, strained relationships. I never gloated, never celebrated his downfall. Instead, I hoped one day he'd find peace, the same way I did. Because envy is a poison, and unless you release it, it consumes you whole. My parents eventually admitted more than pride, they admitted regret. My mother confessed late one evening, "We were so afraid of you failing that we forgot to let you fly." My father added, "And we were too proud to admit you had already surpassed us." It was a flawed apology, but it was human. And for the first time, I felt compassion for them not as parents, but as people who carried their own fears. Yet, I didn't rebuild my life around them. I had already built my own foundation, one rooted in resilience, not validation. I loved them, but I no longer needed them. That was the true liberation. When you stop begging for love from the ones who withhold it, you learn to give it freely to yourself. I began writing a book, part memoir, part manifesto for anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. Each chapter was a testament to survival, each page a declaration that rejection doesn't define you. The book became a bestseller, not because I was special, but because everyone who read it saw a piece of themselves in the struggle and in the triumph. One evening, standing on the balcony of my home, I watched the city lights flicker below. It struck me how far I had come from being treated like an outcast at my own family table, to creating a life where my table had a seat for anyone who needed it. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. It had shaped me. People often ask me, if you could go back, would you change anything? And though the betrayals hurt, though the loneliness nearly broke me, my answer is always the same. No, because without the darkness, I would never have learned how brightly I could shine. Without their rejection, I might never have discovered my true strength. So this is my truth. My family said I failed. They laughed, they doubted, they betrayed. But in the silence they left me with, I found my voice. In the ashes of their rejection, I built a fire that could not be extinguished. And today, I live not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. Because the greatest victory isn't rising above others, it's rising above who you used to be.